Released in October 1987, the Tamiya Super Sabre was the last buggy to utilise the Hotshot gearboxes and chassis. It's 2023 and we still haven't seen a re-release of the Super Sabre, despite the Boomerang getting one in 2008 and it's due another one this year, and they're practically the same buggy. Tamiya, I can't wait anymore. It's the red parts together with the futuristic body shell that make this one of my favourite buggies. So settle in and let me show you how I took a 1987 Super Sabre and made a re-release with updated parts. I bought this Super Sabre on eBay, but the transmitter was broken and the batteries were dead. Nah, it's cool. The batteries got moved on to someone wanting them for display and the transmitter was taken by someone wanting it for parts. This gave me some cash back towards the rebuild, but with a buggy looking like this and a long way off looking like this, I had a lot of work to do. Fortunately, this buggy came with a few hop-ups, a Parma motor, dual shock mounts and a Parma bumper. The front dual shock mounts were originally used on the Super Shot but then made available for the Hotshot. And many people utilised the dual shock mounts on a variety of buggies within the Hotshot family, as demonstrated on the Super Sabre that I bought off eBay. So now the backstory's done, let's take a look at how this restoration led to more of a re-release build. First things first, I strip down the buggy and give everything a really good clean. Next, I check the parts for any wear or damage. There were some signs of wear on the axles and drive shafts, but most notably on the gearbox joints. But nothing particularly excessive, although I did decide to replace them, which led me down a bit of a path, but we'll go through that later. I found a split in one of the upper rear arms, but this is a common problem, so nothing surprising here, and an easy fix. And finally, I found a bent steering rod. That's easy to replace and not an issue. Referring to the original manual, I start the build. First up are the gearboxes. The originals use C-clips rather than E-clips, which are thicker. E-clips are what's used in the re-release Hotshot gearboxes. They've been redesigned slightly to allow for the extra thickness by housing the bearings 1 mil deeper. I found this out when I bought new gearbox joints and I noticed they've been redesigned too. On the originals you'll notice they're flat, and you used to have to put an 850 bearing over the shaft to reduce any slop. The re-release version kind of had this built in. Obviously it's not a bearing, it's a beveled edge. But if you ask me, I think the original, using the 850 bearing, reduced the most slop. So after buying new gearbox joints, I was forced to get the re-release gearboxes. And at this point, it became more of a re-release build than a restoration. That meant I had to get these polyurethane bushings for the rear gearbox joints. And you also need one later on for the prop shaft. So make a note. Looking up the part numbers for the wheel axles, I found out the hop-up version was the reinforced axle for the CR01, so I got 2 sets of these, one for the front and one for the rear. It's a good idea to use body clips to stop them falling out whilst you build, but for some reason, they're not in my next clip. What a plonker. These are the re-released drive shafts. They're much thicker than the ones supplied in the original kit from '87. The manual tells you to use grease here, but I like to use this anti-friction dry lubricant because it doesn't collect dirt and create a grinding paste like grease can. I don't think anyone is a fan of these screw pins because they do cause a lot of stress, as we saw earlier with that breakage on the upper arm. The chassis would really benefit from a suspension shaft set, but I don't think one's available. Here you can see I went with a re-release prop shaft. It's much more substantial than the original and should improve performance. I'm going to skip the build of the front gearboxes because we've already covered off the points of the redesign earlier, so let's get the front arms built. I've gone with the re-release ball joints. The originals are made from brass and you used to have to use a flathead screwdriver to install them. The new re-release version are made of steel and use a hex drive to install them. A bit more modern. With the uprights built and being on the re-release path, I snip off some new arms and install everything using the re-release front drive shafts. The play in the upper wishbones is a common problem, and back in the day, CRP and Parma sold a front wishbone brace. Well, my mate Josh, he made some out of alloy for his buggies. He made an extra one for me. So that's that sorted. Nice. Let's have a look at the difference between the original chassis and the re-release chassis. Fun fact, over half of Tamiya's products are now manufactured in the Philippines. So this is probably why the re-release chassis doesn't say made in Japan. Very interesting. Now it's time to install the steering mechanism. I'm using a 12 kg SBT servo together with the high torque Kimbra Servo Saver. And instead of reinstalling the brass ball connectors, I've gone with the ones that would come in the Hotshot re kit. Now I can attach the gearboxes to the chassis, and I've decided to stick with the Parma Cyclone motor. I've not been able to find out much about this motor online, other than its 27 turn, I think, but all the images show it with a blue end bell. Is this one any different? If you know, please let me know in the comments. According to the manual, I should have sorted out the shocks by now, but I'm going to do that in a little bit. So let's attach the front gearbox and see how this looks. Not using the stock Servo Saver, I want to check everything's okay, so let's have a go at attaching the bumper. Here, you can see there's an issue, so I'm going to have to trim this down. Using a Dremel, I trimmed down the Servo Saver till it's the same size or smaller than the original one supplied by Tamiya. This will make sure there's no binding, and here you can see it solved my issue. And those of you with a keen eye are going to notice that I stuck with the original Tamiya bumper and I've actually sold the Parma one. At this stage I decided to get all my electronics in, and you can see I'm using a Hobbywing 1060 to go with the brushed motor and a FlySky receiver which I use with my GT5 transmitter. It stores up to 20 cars, the range is awesome and it allows me to drive one-handed so I can still record running videos. Now the gearboxes are attached, let's take a look at the shock absorbers. I do have the original red CVAs, but they're looking a little bit dull and I wanted everything to look fresh and clean. So I bought some new anodised ones off eBay. They were a little bit too long, so I put an O-ring on the inside of the shock shaft to reduce them to the same size as the original CVAs. I think they look great against the red parts, so let's just hope they perform as good as they look. It's time to paint, and I'll start with the chassis cover, painting it black so it matches in and remains hidden. Well, that was easy. So let's see how we get on with this penguin body shell, because I've got a feeling this one's going to be pretty tricky. Taking a look at what we get, the body comes in two parts. There's an additional wing that attaches to the wing under the body shell. You get a couple of stickers, but no window masks. Not really an issue. The window is the only masking required on this body. Everything else is going to be painted silver. The quality of the shell seems decent, and it's nice seeing all these body lines. Oh, a little dimple. Let's not complain, because if it wasn't for Penguin, I'd never be able to get this project done. They put out some great replica bodies, and this is no exception. And Tamiya bodies are not always perfect either, so don't get it twisted. I use a fine line Sharpie to highlight the cut line to help me cut it out a little bit quicker. I find it difficult to do accurately, so I just use this method for the rough cut when removing the bulk of the excess. After cutting out the body shell and sanding all the edges to make them smooth, I move on to the tricky areas. There are two slots at the front of the body shell that need to fit over the chassis. These took me ages to do, to be accurate, because I wanted them to be a nice snug fit. After carefully measuring and cutting a couple of slots, I use a hobby file to increase the length and the width that they needed to be. I thought this was the safest idea to avoid cutting too far or splitting the body shell. I kept offering it up to make sure it would fit the chassis perfectly. Now it's time to cut the back of the body shell underneath the wing. I use a body reamer to make two holes, giving me access to cut with a hobby knife and scissors. This was definitely the hardest part of the shell to cut, but I got there in the end. I just had to exercise a lot of patience. I've had this screw bag kicking around for years, and now I get to use it as I need a few screws out of here just to attach that secondary wing to the body shell. Before painting the body shell, I give it a really good clean to remove any releasing agents from production and key the surface so the paint has something to adhere to. Having just the window masks to do should be easy. Or is it? This was a little bit tricky, but I decided to paint this area black. Good idea? Well, you let me know, because now it's time to remove the window mask and the protective film. Finally, it's time to get the decals on, and I can see that finish line. But this took me all day, well over 8 hours. I picked up these decals from eBay. They're pre-cut, but they've still got this really big border around them. So you got to trim them, and that's not something I'm particularly very good at. They're much thicker than original Tamiya decals, so if you've got a small amount of this sticker that needs to curve over an edge, you're going to be out of luck, because it's just going to want to keep lifting back up. Using a hobby knife, I trimmed these decals the best I could to try and avoid such issues. I'll keep an eye on them, as I expect there could be some areas that start to lift. As expected, we've got a problem. The decals are lifting as I've been working on this video edit. They're just too thick and the adhesive isn't the best either. I've taped them down for now to keep them in place, and I've already got the footage of when they were all stuck down, but it's disappointing as I even used a hairdryer to massage the stickers into place thinking this might happen. If you know of a product that would be good to help me out here, let me know. All I can think of is super glue. That could get a little bit messy. Or perhaps try an MCI decals. I've actually got a good idea for a custom body shell in the pipeline, so if you want to see that, subscribe to stay tuned. But for now, let's just pretend this never happened. Taking a look at the box art for the Super Sabre, it has silver wheels, but it actually came with white ones back in the day. Well, currently I've got these. I was sat there watching an Andy Robinson RC video, and he had picked up the Hotshot 2 Blockhead Motors edition, which came with silver wheels, but he ended up doing his own thing with it, and he actually put white wheels on. So I dropped him a line and said, "Andy, please sell me those wheels." He said no, a little disappointed. But then he said, "You can have them for free." What a legend. Thanks, Andy. And with that generosity, we can now get these bad boys on the buggy and complete the look. And you can let me know in the comments what you think about this overall project.